Hey, Corey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. If you're listening, I invited Corey to be on. She is an ADHD coach. Is that correct? Am I getting that right?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the reason why we connected is I've been having the experience of working with ADHD athletes much more. And I wanted to learn from Corey some things that I could do, and I wanted her to be able to share her experience as a coach and individually, personally, to help educate everybody. So, like, what maybe you could talk about? I think I know the answer. What
Yeah.
inspired you to become an ADHD coach?
Yeah. Well, I am in an ADHD family. I have ADHD. My kids have ADHD. My dad
Mm,
has ADHD. And so I was an educator. I was a teacher and an educator for a long time. And I really worked closely with kiddos that were neurodiverse. And
hmm
I saw that the tips and the tricks that we were telling families and kids and even the adults in their lives weren't working for them because they weren't necessarily personalized or ADHD or neurodiverse informed. And so I decided that that was something that I wanted to do. So I went and got certified and have been working in this particular role for about 5 years now and supporting families and
hmm
teens and adults in building those tools and systems that make things a little bit easier and make life feel less overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess from the adolescent population, the teen population, which is my primary population for coaching, like
Yep.
what are some of the biggest challenges that you see them have as athletes specifically if you deal with athletes?
Yes, I have a lot of high school and college athletes that I coach, and my 16-year-old is a pretty intense water polo player, and she was diagnosed with ADHD when she was 4. So we've
Hmm
been on her ADHD journey for a long time. And some of the big struggles and challenges that I think athletes that with ADHD face are time management, right? I very time-lined ADHDers. So we either think we have all the time in the world or no time. And that's the struggle when you're trying to get in all your reps and you're trying to do all your practices and also trying to do school and be social and all of those
Yeah.
things. Organization is another big one. So it's not just organization of like your practice stuff and your team stuff, because and we all know that is a struggle too. I tell the story that my daughter last year was MVP of her whole league for water polo, and then also on
Oh,
her team she won most likely for to forget your cap, suit, and goggles. So those two those two things can go hand in hand, right? But it's also organization of thoughts, right? Remembering the plays, being able to execute them, being able to process information quickly in real time. Another big one is working memory. And so that goes along with that organization. So, working memory is being able to hold information in your brain long enough to execute it, to organize it, and then to execute it. And if you think about it in a game standpoint, right, if you play a team sport, there's a lot of information coming into you at all times
mm,
that you need to hold and then figure out how to execute. And I think another really big one is hyper focus and hypo focus. So hyper focus is just being like
mm,
totally dialed in, you're focused on one thing, you don't know the rest of the world is around you, which can be awesome in
mm.
sports. But we
Yes.
also can go into hypo focus where we're focused on everything. And that can be really distracting.
Sure.
That can pull us away from being in the zone. So those are some of the big ones. And then of course motivation,
hmm
right? So ADHDers don't harness and have motivation in the same way as neurotypical people. And it's because of the way that we don't regulate our dopamine. And our dopamine is our
Yeah.
regulation chemical in our brain, right? And so it's not that ADHDers don't have enough dopamine, it's that we don't regulate it well. And
hmm
so there can be days where athletes feel like, I love my sport. I'm passionate about it, but I just can't get to the gym or I just don't want to go to practice today and I don't know why. And it causes a lot of shame and a lot of, feeling really bad about themselves and wondering why everyone else can just get up and go when they don't want. too. So those are some of the biggies that I see both in the athletes that I work with as a coach and in my own
Yeah.
kiddo.
Yeah. And so, I was telling you before we hit record that I was just on a phone call or Zoom with a athlete. And one of the things he was telling me as we were wrapping up and I was getting on to our conversation was, he can really hyperfixate on mistakes. And
Yes.
he has the ADHD diagnosis, right? So like
Hmm.
the mistake, he said, like I fixate on the mistake, it becomes a distraction, and I can dwell on that mistake for days, right?
Yes.
Which is not only affecting his performance on the field, but it's affecting his life. So like, is that
Hmm.
something that you find that comes up for your clients?
Yes. So just in general, most ADHDers also experience something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria,
Hmm.
RSD. And RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, is this large reaction, both physical, emotional, and mental, those thoughts, to either perceived or actual criticism or rejection. And so in athletes, that often shows up if you play this amazing game, but there was the one thing that you didn't do correctly, and you feel like you let your team down, you feel like you let your coach down, maybe your parents down. And then our brain just ruminates and fixates on that over and over and over. And the really hard part with RSD, well, there's several hard parts, obviously, but one of the really hard parts is that it kind of is like self feeding, right? Because the more that our brains make those connections of, oh, I messed up, that means I'm a bad player, or oh, I have made that mistake, that means that my teammates aren't going to be able to rely on me,
Mm.
the more that that beast grows. And so it kind of does take over. So unless we put in really intentional strategies and tools to interrupt it, to reframe it, to help ourselves see, from the big picture, it's almost impossible to get out of. And it doesn't just affect them in sports, right? It's
Mm.
socially on the team. Oh, this couple of players went out after the game and they didn't invite me. Nobody likes me. I'm not really, part of the team. And
Mm.
then that also can be really hard as well. So RSD is a huge challenge for well, all people with ADHD, but particularly young athletes in terms of that mental component.
Yeah. I mean, just when you're talking about that idea of sensitivity, rejection, right? Like I can't imagine being more sensitive to rejection, right? Because even if you're not neurodiverse, we're all
Hmm.
sensitive to rejection, but if
Yeah.
it's magnified, right? Like with coaching, right?
Hmm.
If you have a coach who's, I think we even talked about this before, like
Yep.
if you have a coach that's really, either like really abrasive or like they ignore you, right? It could be really, really traumatic and hard to sort of figure out like, how do I manage this situation? And coaching is such a big thing, right? For any young athlete. But if you have a coach that's not aware of how to handle this, or they're doing something that's diametrically opposed to what they should be doing, it can really have an effect not only on performance, but just on the mental health and well-being of a young athlete. It's a really, really tricky thing, I would imagine.
For sure. For sure. So one of the things that I always say is, there's this movement for growth mindset, which I
Hmm.
100% believe in.
Sure.
And for kids with RSD or with ADHD, really they're interchangeable. The research
Hmm.
shows that up to 98% of people with ADHD have RSD. So they're
Okay.
they're definitely besties. But what can happen is this growth mindset is, oh, you just haven't done it yet. You just need to try harder. You know,
Hmm.
you just need to give it more. But when their RSD is triggered by a coach yelling at them or being like, I can't believe you made that mistake again, or whatever it might be, they really go into survival mode. They go into fight, flight, or freeze. And when we are in survival mode, we know that our brain does not care about growth mindset. Our brain doesn't care about trying harder. Our brain is literally trying to survive. And so I believe that those techniques of you just need to try harder, you just haven't done it yet, don't work for someone with ADHD unless you let them figure out how. So, an example could be I'll use water polo because I watch a lot of it. You you took a shot you shouldn't have taken. You should have done an extra pass. And the coach is like, I can't believe you didn't do that extra pass. We could have gotten the goal. And next time you need to take that extra pass. But what that child has already heard is like, you failed the team.
Mm,
And so they're not going to hear anything else. Their brain isn't going to be able to process. So
mm,
instead, you could say something like, hey, I noticed you didn't see the other player open. How can we make sure that before you shoot, you do a quick scan to make sure
mm.
that nobody else maybe has a better shot? How can I help you do that? And then it becomes this actual opportunity to learn and grow rather than, hitting them with that trigger first and then just keep making them go completely offline.
Yeah, and I think you've said a bunch of stuff that I want to kind of drill into, right? Like the idea of having intentional strategies. I'm very big on that, right? Like let's be intentional with what we're going to do. Let's have a plan and let's practice it. And I think to your point, what you just said was like that idea that it becomes a problem solving exercise that gets addressed incrementally over time versus it's not binary, right? In that
Yes,
moment, like you made a bad decision in that moment, but there was a lot of decisions you could have made, right? There's no perfect decision. There's no right
yes,
decision. There's no wrong decision. There's infinite decisions in a water polo match or
yes,
a soccer game or a hockey game, right?
yes,
Like, yeah, could you have made a better decision? Yeah. How can we make a better decision next time versus being like, you should have done this in that moment? And I think not
exactly.
only is it the understanding of what the individual's going through, but it's just that coach having the empathy to be like, hey, that's a really hard thing they're doing, even though maybe I did it once before when I played water polo.
Yeah,
Being able to be like, hey, I understand where you're coming from. Let's figure out how to do it better. What's the strategy for next time, right? And I think
yes.
that is something that a lot of coaches struggle with just
Hmm.
because they get so emotional about the outcomes that happen in a game because of what it means, whether it's we're going to lose the game, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to lose my
Yep.
job, whatever, right? And so
Yeah,
they're
there's a
not,
lot on the line.
yeah, yeah. So like I know that you when we talked the first time, you told me about your experience as an athlete. So like what was that like for you when you were a swimmer, I believe, right?
I was a swimmer. Yeah.
So what was it like? What was your experience like being an ADHD athlete and sort of having that coaching and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to have some pretty amazing coaches that followed me all along. And when I was growing up, which was great. And then I got to college and I had
Mhm.
not such an awesome coach.
Mhm.
And what happened very quickly is it was definitely that trigger, right? So my coaches
Mhm.
growing up knew that maybe I needed to have things explained again. They knew that I had the tendency for perfectionism, which a lot of ADHDers have, which goes along with that RSD. So they were careful with my corrections. They were careful after I had a bad swim of, walking me through what I did well and walking me through what I could do next time and help me learn and grow from it. And then I went to college and my first college coach was kind of the exact opposite. It was sink or swim, pun intended. And it was very much um, you know, you have to be perfect, otherwise you don't get to travel, or, you make one mistake or you're late for one practice and you're off the roster for the weekend. And there was no extra explaining, there was no listening, there was no understanding of hard days. And it made me really hate the sport. I started to really think like, why did I do this? Why did I come to college to swim? This is
Mhm.
terrible. And I ended up transferring and going to a different school where I had a coach much like the coaches that I grew up with, who understood that I maybe needed some extra time to process when they gave me oral direction,
Mhm.
or I was going to have days where I was super, locked in, hyper focused. Those were the best practices, the best meets. And then they were going to have days where it was kind of really hard for me to focus. And I might get out and go, use the bathroom 10 times during practice because I was having a day. And they allowed me to ride those waves. And it made me love the sport again. It made me a much better swimmer than I had
Mhm.
been in the previous year. And so I think that what I really learned, and then when I was a swim coach, what I really learned is that there's no one size fits all, right? So
Yeah.
what really motivates some kids and supports some kids in loving the sport? Because there is so much on the line, and there is a lot that these kids, a lot of pressure. I'm in the middle of recruiting with my daughter. I get it. And in the end, like, I hope our goal as adults is that they love the sport, like that they love playing, they
Yeah.
love swimming, they love what it is. And so as a coach, as a swim coach, what I learned is that my main objective is when kids show up on that deck, that they feel supported, that they feel heard, that they feel
Hmm.
like they love it. If they're having a bad day, they know it's okay to have a bad day. If they're having a great day, they know, okay, today's the day you're going to push it and you're going to rock it. And to do that, you have to understand how their brains work. And if we have coaches, which, like my first college coach, who didn't really care how his athletes' brains work and he just cared about the outcome, I don't think that you are really, supporting the whole athlete.
Yeah, and I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I think the reality of it is there's probably more coaches who are only focused on the outcome and they're not really focused on supporting the whole athlete, which is where I think
Mhm.
coaches like us come in, is where we're, the way I would describe it, and I'm be curious to hear your take on this, is like, I'm really big on coaching the athlete to coach themselves, right? I heard someone say yesterday, I've said this like 4 times in the last 24 hours. I saw something on social media, which most of it's but this
Yeah,
is really good. It's like, I want you to be coach proof. And I love that, meaning like,
I love that.
you don't control who the coach is. The coach is going
Yeah.
to do what the coach is going to do. They're the authority figure, it's their
Mhm.
program. But can I operate in the world without reacting to everything that the coach does, knowing that there's only so much I can control and I have the tools and the strategies to be able to manage that, right? It doesn't have to be,
Yes.
I don't have to be perfect. I can just settle myself in my own way. And that one, one size doesn't fit all way, that unique way of like,
Yeah.
hey, I know this is not right or good, or it's not helpful, but I have a way to move through it and navigate it and regulate it and be okay.
Yes.
That's a really hard thing for a young person to do. But if we can teach them to do
Mhm.
that in a way that works for them, that's a home run, right? Because unfortunately,
For
we
sure.
can't make all these coaches be as educated and empathetic and you caring as we'd
Yes.
like them to be.
100%. And I mean, that's a life skill. Because again, what do we want from our young athletes? Life skills, right? The
Yes.
skills that I learned from being a competitive swimmer for 18 years
Hmm.
as someone with ADHD were time management, motivation, goal setting. We are terrible at setting goals, ADHDers. We can set the goals great, like thinking forward and
Right.
seeing them to the end. It's so hard for us. So all of those things that I learned showing up every day, even when things are hard, all of those things that were instilled in me as an athlete have helped me tremendously as an adult with ADHD, like more than I could probably ever explain. And so I also think that too, right? That I love that being coach proof, because you're going to be coached your whole life. You're going to have a boss, you're going to have colleagues, you're going to, right? And so being able to build those skills that work for you, not what mom and dad tell you that works for them, not what your older brother worked for him, but actually work for you, aren't just going to help you on the field your sophomore year in high school, but are going to help you in your first job, are going to help you as you go through life. So I agree. I think that is such an awesome way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to, I mean, goal setting is just such a common thing, right? In our vernacular as coaches,
Yeah.
just in the world, right? So, like, but specifically with that, right? Like, is it something where if you're working with an athlete or you're working with a client you're coaching, like, is it about really breaking things into smaller pieces, or is that too much of an oversimplification?
No, that's definitely the very first step, right? So when we have like long-term goals for ADHD, a couple things happen. One,
Okay.
we lose novelty really quick. So a goal might sound really exciting, but unless we get the immediate return, that novelty wears off really fast. So having those smaller chunks,
Mm.
and this is something that I work on all the time with my with my with my clients, all the C words with my clients, is making sure that they have those smaller goals that they can be successful in. And sometimes it's literally like, okay, today my goal is to make sure I bring my swimsuit, my cap, and my goggles to practice so I can actually get in the pool. And then we celebrate that. Okay, what's my goal tomorrow? My goal tomorrow is to, not let any shots get past me. Okay, great. What's your goal the next day? Rather than my goal is to get a D1 scholarship.
Yes.
That's just one, that's kind of out of our control. So I don't really love that goal because
Yes.
it's not in our control whether we do it or not. But also, that's just too broad and overwhelming. So yes, so breaking it up to small successes. The other thing is making sure that we have a falter plan. So as we go along to, to achieve our goal, things don't go perfectly. We know that life gets in the way, things happen, things are out of our control that happen.
Mhm.
And so when I work with my ADHDers, what ends up happening is as soon as things don't go right, their brain's like, see, you can't do it. We should just give up. The motivation drops, the dopamine drops,
Mm.
and then it becomes really hard. So I always have at least a couple falter plans put into place for when that happens. So as soon as, you don't want to go to practice one day, or you were totally tuned out in a game, we say, okay, that's the trigger for the falter plan.
Right.
What are you going to put into place so that you don't totally just derail
Yeah.
your whole plan?
Yeah, I love it. And that's something I talk to athletes about. I call it, I would say it a different way, but like having a planned response, right? Like I just
Yep.
had this conversation with a young man who's going to college to play baseball. He's one of my clients and he has ADHD. And I asked him, sort of like what his biggest concerns were. And, he's very, very, very mentally sort of sharp and tough, like
Mhm.
more so than an average kid, probably because of his experiences, right? Some of
Yeah.
which is ADHD, right? He's like sort
Yeah.
of more resilient because of it, right? And we can
Yeah.
get into like the positives and the
Yeah.
superpower element of it. But when I asked him like what's his biggest concern about going to college, he was like, "Well, yeah, if I don't get the playing time I want, I could see that being a problem, right?" And so that's kind of where I want to go with him is like, "Hey, let's have that planned response of like it's very possible that you're not going to play as much as you want. Rather
Sure.
than pretending like that's not a reality, let's
Yes.
actually think about it and go like if this happens, what are we going to do? What's going
Yes.
to happen if very realistically you're not playing as much as you want to, and rather than letting that be the thing that sort of saps all your motivation because you're like, I'm getting up at 6 a.m. every day to lift or practice and I'm not
Mhm.
playing, how am I going to keep the focus on like how do I do something today that's going to get me to where I want to go tomorrow, and how do I not let that derail me? Right now, is it going to be
Exactly.
foolproof? No, but if we're thinking about it and being intentional ahead of time, we start to practice it and like build in that foundation, it's going to be a lot more likely for it to get executed when they get there versus just being like, oh, well, wait till we get there. And then you get there and it's like craters.
100%. 100%. And something that I would add specifically for ADHDers is
Mm-hmm.
in those falter plans, I always make sure to have at least a couple of the four big motivators. So it's novelty, interest, urgency, and challenge. Those are the big four
Mm-hmm.
for motivating an ADHD brain. So, when we're thinking about, okay, I'll use that example, right? You're not going to get enough playing time that you think you should have. That's going to drop your motivation, right? Exactly. Like it's really hard to get out of bed at 5 in the morning as
Right.
a college student. It's even extra hard if you're like, well, I know I'm not even going to play this. I'm not even going to see the field this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So then adding in, okay, so with your falter plan, how can we add in some novelty? How can we add in some interest? How can we add in some urgency or challenge? So maybe instead, the challenge can be instead of the game, maybe the challenge is, you know what, I'm going to do 12 reps with that weight instead of 10. Or
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to see, or maybe interest is, you know what, on the way to the gym, I'm going to listen to like my new favorite album and I'm going to pump myself up. Or another interest could be, okay, after I go to the gym, I'm going to go and I'm going to get the best breakfast burrito on campus that I can.
Yes.
And I'm only going to do it, I'm only going to allow myself to get that breakfast burrito if I go to the gym. Right.
Right.
So,
Reward,
uh,
building in a reward.
Yeah. So having those big four as part of that falter
Mm-hmm.
plan helps our brain then to just kind of reignite some of that dopamine that is
Mm-hmm. Okay.
probably dropped because you don't have that natural reward of getting to see the field. So
Yeah.
you have to build in those
You
other.
have to manufacture it in a lot of ways, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You're not getting it from the source that's out of your control. So you got to take it back and go, hey, I'm going to create the challenge. I'm going to create the novelty. I'm going to create the reward and I'm going
Yes.
to go do this. And I'm going to do it myself to get that dopamine hit back up
Exactly.
to kind of keep going versus letting it crash and then staying in that, which I would imagine has pretty significant negative knock-on effects, right? Where you can start to become depressed because your dopamine levels drop and you don't know how to like get yourself back into that place where you feel like, okay, I'm ready to get back at it. Is that
Yes.
I've kind of just poked my head into the research a little bit. I'm starting to
Yeah.
do more like reading. So is that like, is depression sort of a sort of element or sort of a component of like those dopamine
Yeah.
crashes?
Depressive symptoms are definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, a lot of college kids and young adults are diagnosed with anxiety or depression instead of ADHD. And then what's interesting is like the SSRIs don't work or like just kind of take that off, but they still have those symptoms. And then if they're diagnosed with ADHD and they get on the ADHD meds, all of a sudden the symptoms don't completely go away because we're human. We live in a world that are so much better. So that misdiagnosis of depression or anxiety is a huge challenge for ADHDers because and then it builds another shame spiral, right? Because you're like, I'm on this SSRI, I'm diagnosed with depression, and I still can't do it. Like, what? There's something really wrong with
Yes,
me.
something's wrong with me.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it really, those, that is, it's the depressive symptom. And the difference with dopamine, because everybody, neurotypical people, their dopamine drops too, right?
Yeah.
All people have days where you're like, oh, I don't want to do it, right? I don't want to
Yeah,
go
of
to the
course.
gym. Like, but what the difference is neurotypical people can harness it up. So I call it the green zone, right? So the green zone is the dopamine where we are regulated. Our
Mhm.
attention's regulated, our motivation's regulated. And then the high zone is when those times where you're like really hyped up, or you're hyper focused, or you're super excited, or you're super
Mhm.
angry. And then the low zone is where it's just that those depressive, I can't get out of bed. And neurotypical people, for the most part, maybe they have a day or two, but then they're like, okay, I'll go to the gym tomorrow. Or they like, okay, I'll set a 5 minute timer, then I'll get up and do it. And their dopamine, they can pull themselves up
Uh-huh.
into a green zone. ADHDers, that is really, really, really hard. Physically almost impossible. So there's even like a bunch of memes on Instagram that's like, I want to do the thing. It's making me anxious not to do the thing, but I can't do
And
the
do the
thing.
thing.
And that's because we can't naturally pull our dopamine up. So exactly what you just said. I always say we borrow dopamine from something else then. What is something that does give you dopamine and borrow it
Mm.
for the thing that you don't have dopamine for?
Yeah.
Um, I watch a really silly reality TV show every time I do the dishes. I cannot do the dishes without it. Like you could, tell me my life depended on it and it would be dragging. But as soon as I put on something like Love Island, I'm like, oh, now I can do the dishes because I'm
Right.
borrowing that dopamine.
Yeah. It gives you that
Hmm.
feeling, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Something I wanted to ask you about because this is something that I've been experiencing a lot. So you probably
Uh-huh.
have some insight on it. And I know like one of the sort of generalizations about ADHDers is that they tend to be, not always, but tend to be visual learners, right? And I'm always thinking about when I'm working with an ADHD athlete, how do I incorporate visual learning? But one of the things actually that I've noticed is they love to talk and they talk a lot. And as a coach, I struggle at times. Like I don't want to cut them off. I want to listen. I want to be attentive. I want to understand. I want to feed back to them what I'm hearing, and I want to let them go and tell me what they have on their minds. But sometimes it does meander. So, like from a coaching perspective, like what's a good way to sort of narrow in or focus in on some of the like the key elements of like a coaching conversation to get them to sort of like really kind of harness it is a good way to
Yeah.
put it.
Yeah. The verbal processing. That is like the ADHD verbal processing. I, I taught for a really long time in my ADHDers. They would just follow me around, like if I was on the playground at recess duty, just type, type, type,
Yeah.
type. They almost don't even, and I'm a verbal processor and I get it. Like, I
Uh-huh.
don't really even need anyone to listen. Like, I
Mhm.
just,
Yes.
so, a couple of things that I recommend is saying, okay, hold on one second, take a breath. I want you to think about what you're trying to say
Hmm.
and see if you can do it in one or two sentences. But just take
Okay.
a breath. You don't have to do it right now, right? Like just, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to just think about if you, and that gives their brain
Hmm.
time. Because really what it is, it's the prefrontal cortex and ADHDers is like, it's not really the strongest part of our bodies. And so that's where ideas are organized, right? And because it's not super strong, we don't have that mental space to organize those ideas. Plus, our brains work so fast. That is a superpower of ADHDers. We are
Okay.
fast thinkers, usually very witty, usually can have like really quick comebacks, right? And so what's happening is all of these ideas are flooding that prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex, like, I don't know
Overwhelmed.
what to do with that. So I'm just gonna get it all out. So if we help them learn how to take a breath and then think and process and then say it and give them the constraints of, okay, I want you to try to tell me in like just two sentences. See if you can do that. Then it gives their brain a like basically like a syntax map. Say, okay, you have two sentences.
Right.
Where can you fit this idea in? And sometimes, sometimes it's like I can't do it in two sentences. Okay, let's see how few you can then,
Right.
right? Let's see, and that can be really helpful. Another thing is I really 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 love voice notes for ADHDers, right? So maybe even before practice, or if you're going to have a one-on-one with your athlete, say, hey, these are the questions we're going to go over. This is, I'm going to talk to you about some feedback about X, Y, and Z. I'd love to know what you think about, that one game. Could you do a voice note and send it to me before we talk? And what that does, it's almost like pre-writing if you're going to write an essay,
Right.
right? It helps them get all of those ideas out
Out.
verbally. Then you can listen to it and think like, okay, I see where they're going. And then you can have much more intentional and targeted questions for them. So it's not as open-ended.
That is a fantastic idea. I love that. Yeah, because like that is something when I hear you saying that, I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, if I did that before a coaching session and I had a sense of where their consciousness was and what they're thinking about, like I can sort of funnel it down for them
Yeah.
before we get there. We don't spend the time just talking because that
Yeah.
does happen. Like
Yeah.
realistically, I get into sessions where like we're supposed to go 40 or 45 minutes, we go an hour because I'm not cutting them off and we're just talking
Yeah.
and like I want them to be able to express themselves, but I'm not sure how to sort of channel it. And that's a really
Yeah.
good way to do that, which that's gold right there for me, like just taking that
Awesome.
away. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
So I guess we've gone 35 minutes. I want to go to the superpower side because I think the thing that I see in coaching, just generally working with athletes, is there always is this sort of natural tendency to focus on the deficiency, right? In anybody, any athlete, what do I need to fix? What's
Yep.
wrong? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my game? What do I need to fix versus, hey, what are my strengths? Like, let's talk
Yeah.
about strengths. I'll say to an athlete, hey, tell me what you're good at. And then
Yeah.
like it's like a trick question that stumps them. Like they don't know what to say. Like they can tell you all the things they don't know how to do well and that
Yep.
they're getting negative feedback on, but like they can't tell you their strengths. So
Yep.
this idea that ADHD is a superpower, which I totally see that ability to hyper focus and do some of these
Mhm.
things that are really, really valuable for high level performance. Like how do we harness that? Or like, it's a big question, right? Like, but like,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that we can sort of try to tap into with ADHDers that's going to really magnify their strengths?
Yeah. Well, so the first one that I think is really important and not always talked about with ADHD is a mindfulness practice. There's so much research. I mean, we know mindfulness for athletes in general is gold,
Yes.
right? But there's so much research that ADHDers benefit from mindfulness tenfold. So, mindfulness helps to strengthen that prefrontal cortex that we talked about. That's where all those executive functions live that are so tricky for us.
Mhm.
There's even a research study that shows that 8 weeks of daily mindfulness um, dramatically increased the gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. So it's pretty awesome. It also helps to make the amygdala, which is that fight, flight, or freeze. It also helps to shrink that and make that less active. So we can move on and be more resilient and
Yep.
not get caught up. The other thing is it helps us with being able to harness that focus. So some days, right, we can show up and be super hyper focused and just laser in our games. And I'm sure that you've seen that. I definitely have seen that with
Mm.
ADHD athletes where you're like, they are on fire today. They are just in the game, they're in the zone. Um, but unfortunately, we can't always harness that. It's not like it's not a switch we can turn it on and off. But with mindfulness, we can learn when our attention has wandered, or we can learn when we're in that hypo focus where we're like focused on everything, and we can be aware of it, and we can learn to bring our focus back to where we are, to the game.
Yeah. So
So it's a big one.
mindfulness is a big part of what I like to be able to do with any athlete, regardless
Yes.
of who they are.
Yes.
And I actually, one of the research articles that I did read was specifically about how mindfulness impacts ADHDers, adolescents, and adults. Right. So
Yeah. Awesome.
the concept makes a ton of sense to me in
Yes.
that, when we're aware of what's going on in our mind, we're much more equipped to make a decision about what to do with it versus
Mhm.
letting it pull us in a direction and we don't know we're there. And now we're just getting dragged off into the distance, which is
Yeah.
when somebody might fixate on a mistake and it's taking them days to sort of overcome it. We might not even realize we're fixating on the mistake in the moment. We might reflect back on it, but we don't really know what's happening. It just sort of drags us along until
Yeah.
something happens to change randomly versus, hey, I have the ability to actually notice it and come back to my breathing, right? And
Yes.
focus on my breathing as an anchor, as a
Yeah.
way to move off of that fixated thought that's not helping me, right? And so like
Exactly.
that is definitely something that um I have the intention to do more with my ADHD athletes. And I think
Mhm.
the research that you referenced, particularly the amygdala piece, I think is great, right? Like that fight, flight, or freeze sounds like it's magnified for ADHDers in a lot of ways, right?
Mhm.
So that ability to like physically manipulate the gland that dictates the alarm system that goes off in your
Mhm.
brain to shrink it to make it less powerful sounds like a really, really valuable thing to be able to do.
100%. And again, life skill, right? Not just when you're in the game, but
Yes.
in life.
Yeah.
Um, a subset of mindfulness that is extremely important for ADHDers. In fact, when I'm working with clients, this is usually where we start is the building of self-compassion. So self-compassion is different than self-esteem or
Mm.
self-confidence. Self-esteem comes from outside, right? I had a great game. I'm a great player. My coach told me that I had an awesome practice. I'm a good player. My parents, are proud of me. All of those kind of things. Where self-compassion is no matter what is going on around us, no matter what kind of game we had, no matter what kind of race we had, we
Mhm.
treat ourselves with kindness and love and respect. That doesn't mean we have to like it, right? It's different than being like not caring that we had a bad game, but it's giving ourselves love and respect and kindness regardless of how we perform. And it's not easy. It's very hard to build, especially in ADHDers. So another, like a little side fact that goes along with this is research shows that kids with ADHD have 20,000 more negative messages by the time they reach middle school than neurotypical kids. 20,000 more. So you think about what that does to a developing brain and a
Mm.
developing self sense. And so it's really hard to be compassionate to ourselves because we've been given these little micro aggressions, really, that
Mm,
we, aren't as good as everyone else, or we're always forgetting something, or we're always messing up, or whatever it might be. And so self compassion first comes with mindfulness, realizing when you aren't being kind to yourself, and then really practicing speaking to yourself and treating yourself like you would someone you really love. So maybe a teammate that you adore, that you think
mm-hmm.
the world of. What would happen if they had a bad game? Or your little brother, or your cousin, or your best friend.
Yes.
And so one exercise that I do is I have folks think about, and I do this with high schoolers, a time that they messed up. And I have them write down everything that they said to themselves.
Mm,
Then I say, okay, now think of a time someone you really love or care for messed up. What did you say to them? And I have them write it down, and then I have them see the difference. And so then I have them tear up the ones they said to themselves and keep the one that they said to the other
right.
people,
And use that
and
for
then start
themselves.
practicing. Yeah. And
Yeah.
obviously it's not like this magic wand, right? We don't live in like a magical world where all of a sudden you're self-compassionate. But the more you practice that, the more we create those neurological connections. So the
Exactly.
easier it gets.
Yeah. So and my instincts were right in the sense that like the way that you're explaining it is exactly the way that I think about it and the way I try to explain it as well, which is, I'll go back to the conversation I was having before we started recording with this other person. And I said to him, I said, if you've been doing this sport for 10 years and you've been your operating system has been running on the same premise of like negative coaches, negative self talk, you're learning
Yep.
all these like things, it's not going to change overnight. Right. And so I guess that as a practical question, like knowing that to be true, right? You're programmed for a certain period of time and now you get involved with a client. Like, how do you sort of communicate to them that it is going to require a little bit of like time and patience to try to like progress forward, but it's not going to change overnight?
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said. I think I tell them like you've had X number of years
Mm-hmm.
of creating these neurological pathways one way,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not going to take that many more years to change it, but it's not going to be something that you try once. That it takes persistence, it takes practice, and it takes a lot of, patience and compassion. I always encourage them to get some sort of accountability buddy, whether it's me or someone on their team
Yeah.
or a parent, that that they can let them know this is something that I'm trying to do, and that person can help them, in the time when I call it their lids flipped, right? When they're not able to access
Yeah.
that
Right.
compassion, that person can be there to help remind them so that it can happen a little more quickly. I did that
Yes.
with my daughter. She just finished Junior Olympics, and in the semi game, she made a mistake. Like it wasn't her fault, but something happened and the ball got stolen, and she got in the car and was just so beating herself up so badly. And she wasn't able to access any of the tools that we've worked on because she was flipped.
Yeah.
She was super upset. And so I was able to ask their questions, what else happened in the game? What else did you do in the game? Did anyone else make a mistake? How do you feel about that person? Right.
Mm.
And she was able to then bring her lid back on and realize that there was a whole, 4 quarters, and that 2 seconds of the game didn't, make or break the outcome. And so having someone else on the outside that can be that support for you as you're building these tools
Mm.
can be really, really,
Yes.
really helpful, because it's really hard to do on your own,
No.
especially if you're an adolescent and you're,
Yes.
have all the other things going on in life as well.
Yeah. Yes. And it's hard, right? When you're stressed out, right? This is something I talk about. When you're under stress and that fight, flight, or freeze kicks in,
Mhm.
it's really hard to remember. You might have learned all these. It's like taking a test, right?
Mhm.
Like you might have studied, you might have gone to class every day, you read the
Mhm.
notes, and all of a sudden you get stuck on a question you don't know how to answer. All of a sudden, your amygdala alarm goes off, fight, flight, or freeze kicks in, and like you forget why, because you're
Yeah.
so overwhelmed with the emotion of, well, if I fail this test, I'm not going to college or whatever, I'm not
Mhm.
getting into the school I want, that you can't focus on just taking a breath and going, hey, it's just one question, let's move forward, right? So that ability,
Exactly. Our
yes,
bodies literally don't want us to, right? Because our
right,
bodies are reacting like we're getting attacked by a bear.
right,
If you're being
exactly.
attacked by a bear, you don't want to take some deep breaths and say, I wonder what I should do right now. Should I talk to the bear? Right? You need to like get out of
Get
there.
out.
And
That's right.
so that is exactly what, our brains and bodies are doing. They're taking care of us. They're
Right.
just a little misguided because a
Yes,
missed shot isn't getting attacked by a bear, or a
exactly.
heart
It's not
problem on a
life
math
and
test
death,
isn't getting attacked by a bear, but
but
our
it
bodies
feels like
don't know
it.
the difference.
It
Exactly.
feels like life and death. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I've got a couple more questions here as we
Yeah.
wrap up. So one is, if what's one thing that we haven't spoken about that we should know about ADHD or specifically adolescents?
Yeah. So I think the big thing that we haven't really talked about is emotional regulation and
Okay.
attention. So those are two big ones. So we talked a little bit about it with RSD,
Hmm.
but one thing that isn't really talked about with ADHD very much is the emotional dysregulation component. I like to say that ADHD is as much about emotional regulation as it is about attention and focus. So if we can't regulate our emotions the way neurotypical people can, and then you think in AD or you think in adolescence, right? We already have struggles um, regulating our emotions in adolescence. So,
Yes.
what is it that we can then do to help build those emotional regulation tools? And spoiler alert, ADHDers don't learn from natural consequences because we don't think ahead. And so, what happens is we tend to have an outburst or get really upset about something or get really frustrated in a game. And then our coach is like, you're out of the game. And think, okay, next time they won't get upset then. I fixed that. But we're like goldfish. We don't remember and our
Mm.
brains don't remember. So the next game we get upset again and the coach is like, hey, I took you out last time and you're
Doing the
pulling this
same thing.
again. And it just, so building emotional regulation tools, and that goes along with the mindfulness, right? Because we
Yeah.
can't do anything with our emotions unless we know that they're happening, and helping us realize when we are triggered,
Mm.
what we feel in our bodies, because our bodies are the first alarm system that something's wrong, and what our action tendencies are is really can be really, really, really helpful in preventing that dysregulation. So helping us stay regulated before we even get dysregulated. And so I work a lot on that with parents with their kiddos. They're like, I don't understand. I took away their phone for a week. I gave them the phone back. They did the exact same thing. They, blew up at me, or they were super rude, or they, you know, threw a plate across the room, or, big, big emotional outbursts. And that's part of ADHD. So learning those emotional regulation tools and helping our kiddos, our athletes in real time practice that, and not relying on punishment or discipline to try to teach them those.
Yeah. So it's not, that's helpful. That's something I don't think I really understood or knew, but it also sounds like helping them recognize the pattern, right?
Mm-hmm.
This happens, my body feels this way,
Yeah.
right? The action tendency, this is what I tend to do in these situations, so I can
Yes.
kind of know it's coming on and I'm aware
Yes.
of it, so that
Yep.
I can do something different with it rather than it just happening and then looking like almost like you black out, you don't realize you did it.
100%. I actually even have a tool that I use called a trigger tracker. And so you can track. It's like you use it after the fact, right? So you go back and you say, okay, what triggered my
Mm-hmm.
my emotional dysregulation? What was I feeling in my body? Were my muscles getting tense? And these are all literally fight, flight, or freeze reactions, right? Was my
Sure.
muscles getting tense? Was my heart beating faster? Was my face getting hot? Was I clenching my fist? Was I ready to
Yep.
fight? And then comes the emotion. So, what emotion was I feeling? Then, what were my thought patterns?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wanted to punch that other player, whatever it might be, or I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe that ref is out to get me.
Mm-hmm.
What was my action? Maybe I did punch the other player and I got a red card, or maybe I screamed at my coach and he pulled me out of the game. And then, okay, when this trigger happens again, what do I want to do instead? And so the more we practice noticing that and planning ahead, again, same thing, the easier it becomes.
Yes.
And I would not just use this tool just for sports, because
Right.
we can't isolate our emotional
Right.
regulation, right? I would use it across the board, at home, with
Yeah.
friends, with siblings, all around.
Yes, I would think the big one there would be how I react to my loved ones, because they tend to be the ones that trigger us the most, right? There's the closest relationship. And do I want to say something that I'm going to regret to my mother or father or brother or sister because I can't control my emotions? Now, I don't,
Yeah,
maybe I don't have full control over it. Maybe I don't mean it. But when you say something, you can't get it back, right? So unless
yeah,
somebody's super understanding, it's going to leave a mark. And so, like,
yeah,
if I can avoid having that reaction, it's going to be valuable to me in that social setting as well, familial
yeah,
setting, as much as it is athletically, right? So it's a
yeah.
tool that applies across environments.
And I think going back to the superpower, it can be a superpower,
Yeah.
right? If you can harness all that adrenaline and endorphins
Mm.
that come with emotional dysregulation into your game, into your race, that is awesome,
Yeah.
right?
I
If
love
you,
that.
instead of being overtaken by fear or overtaken by anger, you can figure out how to harness that and not let it get away from you. Those are powerful chemicals rushing through
Yes.
your body
Yeah.
that you can really use. I think that was something that I actually saw a sports psychologist when I was 13, because I was having a lot of challenges in my races, and that was
Hmm.
something that she helped me learn how to do. And I think that made me the swimmer that I was. I wasn't supposed to be a good swimmer. I was 5'2". I was not tall. I was a pretty good swimmer. And I think a huge part of that was I learned how to harness those incredible chemicals that my body threw at me because I had ADHD into my sport. So that can be a superpower for sure.
I can't help but ask, how did you do that? Like, how did you harness it?
Yeah, so I mean, it was mindfulness. I didn't know it was mindfulness at the time. I just thought that these were like really cool things that I could do. But basically noticing, because my thing was fear. I would get extremely nervous, I would
Hmm.
get extremely fearful, and I would shut down, and then I'd have a bad race. And so taking about 10 to 15 minutes before my race, I had one song that I would listen to. And that would be my, like, I would listen to it over and over on a Walkman at the time. So I
Yep.
had like my mixtape and I
I
would
know it.
rewind and play an offspring song. And so I'm really dating myself, and I would just listen to it. And I would literally, like, every time I felt like it was starting to take over, I would literally picture it like coming into the center. So I visualized it coming into the center
Wow. Okay. That's awesome.
over and over and over. And I mean, I listened to that song, I don't, a million times probably. I don't even know. Now I hear it and I get like a reaction when it comes on the radio, because I'm like,
That's
I have
pretty
to go
cool.
swim 400 IM. But that was how I did it.
That's
And now,
great.
my daughter, we've talked a lot about that. And what she does is she goes in the middle of a game, like when she can, obviously not in the middle of a play, she goes underwater and she like tightens up her muscles and then like
Does like a
shakes them out.
progressive,
So it's
like a relaxation exercise.
exactly, and it's like, sensory deprivation. She just goes underwater, and I'll see it in a game. I'll see her go underwater
Right.
and then
She's
like
like
pop back up.
expunging the stress. She's like
Yeah,
clenching and she's letting it
yeah,
go so she can relax. That's really cool
exactly.
stuff.
And then I'll even say, I'll be like, this next play is going to be awesome. Like, watch, because she's able to do that. Where there's players on her team who are phenomenal players who
Hmm.
don't do that, right? And they get red carded or they get rolled, and because they don't know how to harness all of those big feelings that come with a sport like water polo, because you're getting beat up, you
Yes,
get
it's
angry,
very,
like,
I've learned a little bit about it working with water polo athletes. It's physical as can be.
yeah, and you get punched and you get scratched, and it's hard to not get angry in a sport like that. So
Yes.
that emotional regulation. And then the other one is attention, right? So we can hyper focus, which is a phenomenal thing. again, I think that's what made me a good swimmer. I could I could harness that hyper focus. I didn't know anything else that was going on. All I knew were those 8 laps of that 200
Yeah.
breaststroke. Like that was all, that was nothing else in the world was happening. And we can do that in games as well, which is a phenomenal thing. What I think sometimes happens is when we're pulled into a timeout, or if we're in the middle of a play and our coach yells at us to like go do something different, that's where we can get like, wait, what just happened?
Yeah.
So helping our athletes as coaches, knowing that maybe we don't, there's certain athletes that we don't yell at in the middle of a play because that's actually going to hurt. Even if we want them to do something else, that might actually hurt the play than help it. And also knowing if we pull them into a timeout, how to keep them focused. I love when coaches use whiteboards that kids can visually see. They're
Yes.
not just orally being told what to do, and keeping it quick and simple and to the point can really, really help with that hyper focus, keeping
Yeah.
them in that hyper focus.
Yes. So we won't get into that more today, but I feel like that's like almost like a second podcast about like coaching strategies because I think there's
Yes.
a lot that could be learned for coaches who can really be better that way. Just because they're not being taught, they're not learning that way. It's not there for them. And so
Right.
knowing how to do that or how to incorporate some of that stuff could be really valuable, especially as you have more kids who are in that space of neurodiverse, being neurodivergent. So,
Yes.
last question, and I usually, if I always ask this question, I'd say it's almost always, um, if there's one thing you'd leave or leave a takeaway with the listener, let's just say it's from the perspective of a parent. That's my guess is that it's probably who's listening here. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
would be the one takeaway for like the parent of an athlete, of an ADHD athlete? What would you share with them?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think the big takeaway is that your kid is probably way harder on themselves than you could ever be on them.
Hmm.
And so, because, all the things we talked about with RSD and emotional dysregulation.
Hmm.
And so, your job is to make sure that they know that their love and their worth is not dependent on how they play or how they perform, and that you are happy to be there with them and you're happy to watch them play, and that that you're proud of them, because I guarantee they are way harder, even if they're not showing it, even if they're pretending like they're apathetic, that they're being way harder on themselves than you could ever be. And we know, like I said, that being hard on our ADHD kids doesn't actually make any transformation. So kindness and patience and modeling that compassion to them is, I think, extremely important for ADHD kids. All kids, but
All kids, but
since we're
yes,
specifically talking about our ADHDers, I
yes,
think it's specifically our
more
ADHDers.
probably more important in a lot of ways. Yes. So
Yes,
that's great. It's a
yes.
great way to end it. Corie, thank you so much for joining
Thank
me on the
you.
podcast.
Thank
It was a great
you.
conversation, and I probably could have gone for another hour asking you questions. So thank you
Yes,
for being
thank
patient
you.
with me.
Yo, thank you so much. This was awesome. Wonderful. I love talking athletics and I love talking ADHD. So this was the perfect balance.
It shows. Thank you so much.
Thank you.